Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. For today's video we have a super fun one, but it's really lengthy, so we're just going to jump right into it. So to begin, we're going to get our board ready. So for this I have three 12-inch boards and a 12-inch dowel. The dowel that I have is really thick. It definitely doesn't need to be this thick. This is just what I had on hand, so this is what I used. I'm marking the center of the board to the sides of the dowel so that I can cut out a hole, and then the dowel is going to sit inside of this hole. So I've cut through all three boards, and now I'm going to hot glue them together, and then we're going to end up with a stack of three boards. And I'm stacking three boards together because I want it to be really sturdy. So I'm pushing the dowel through, making sure it fits, and then I'm going to glue on a 10-inch board to the very bottom. And this is going to prevent the dowel from poking through, and this is also going to give me a little bit of height, so when I go to lift up the board I won't have any trouble. Once all your boards are glued together, then we're going to glue the dowel onto the board. So I'm just filling up that hole with a bunch of hot glue and then sticking the dowel right inside. I'm starting with an 8-inch cake, and this is going to be the very bottom of Yoda's body. I'm cutting out a hole so I can sit this right around the dowel. And then I'm adding in my fillings. After the 8-inch, I stacked on a 6-inch. Looking back, I would have preferred to do a 7-inch rather than a 6-inch. It would have made things a lot easier. So now I'm going in and rounding off these edges. I want to give his body sort of like a dome shape, so I'm trying my best to sort of blend these two cakes together. And again, that's why I would have preferred to have a 7-inch on top rather than a 6-inch. So after I got a pretty good shape, then I'm going around and adding a layer of ganache to the whole cake. And the reason that I chose ganache over buttercream is because this cake is really crumbly when it's baked fresh and I haven't let it rest. So to keep in those crumbs and prevent the cake from breaking as I crumb coat it, I use ganache because it's a lot thinner and smoother than buttercream. I'm really trying to build up that ganache on the gap where the two cakes meet, just so I can have a smoother dome at the end. After my ganache firmed up, I went in and started stacking on the head. So for this I'm using two 6-inch domes, and I've added a board in for support. For the head I just filled it with buttercream, since I was going to shave a lot of it down. And now to start carving the head, I'm flattening out the front and the back of the head. And then I'm going in and rounding out all those edges so that it's nice and smooth. And then from here we're just going to start carving. So I carved a little bit more on the top portion of the head just because his mouth protrudes a little more than where his eyes are. And for his eyes I just carved out two indents. For his chin and his cheekbones I carved out sort of like two triangles, and this is going to really highlight those cheekbones. And then I went in and flattened the top of his head because his head isn't so round. And then you're just going to work your way around the cake, carving around to smooth out all the harsh lines. And then once you have a pretty good shape, then you're going to cover it in ganache. And again, we're using ganache because this cake is super crumbly. Now I'm going in with an acetate smoother to smooth out his head while the ganache is still a little pliable. If you wait too long, the ganache will harden up and then you'll have a really hard time doing this. So try to work a little quick when you're using ganache. I went back in and added a little ganache where the two cakes meet, just so it could have a smoother surface because it was a bit of a gap. So from here, you're just going to add ganache wherever you want to build on his features. And you don't have to worry about it too much because you can always just do it with the fondant. But starting with a good base is going to really help us later on and make things a little easier. So after the ganache firmed up, then I went in with buttercream. And the only reason I went in with buttercream is just because personally I think buttercream tastes great with cake. And I didn't want the client to miss out on having buttercream. But of course it's not necessary. You could just go in with another layer of ganache if you wanted to. So I'm smoothing this out with my acetate smoother. And this smoother, it's actually just a strawberry box, like the strawberry fruit clamshell box. That I cut up and I rounded out the edges. So I popped the cake into the fridge, and then once it firmed up, then I started working on the face features. So I'm starting off with the eyebrows. I'm going to end up laying fondant over what I'm doing right now. This is just to build up on his features. So I added on eyebrows, I added on his upper lip, and then I added on a little nose. And now I'm going to roll out my green fondant so I can cover his head. So I went with a really light green, which I should have gone a little bit darker. It would have made things easier, but this was a whole learning process for me. So I went with this light green color, draped it all over his head, and then right away I went in and cut all the excess because had I left it all there, then it would have just torn the fondant completely, and then I would have had to redo it. So where his eyes were, I popped the two holes just to get out the air that was inside the fondant. And once I had it covered, then I went in with my Dresden tool and I began adding lines to the top of his head. Well, these are like his wrinkles. And then from here, it's just a matter of adding the rest of his features and accenting his features. So he's really wrinkly. He's a very wrinkly baby. So you're going to add a bunch of wrinkles on top of his head, and then you also want to add some to his lip. So I went in and I gave him a really big smile, well, sort of really big, and I wish I hadn't done that. So my initial thought for it was to make him look really playful and just really cute, and then I ended up switching it up, and then I wanted him to look a little like less playful, I guess. So I shouldn't have gone in with such a big smile, but it was fine in the end. It worked out. Now for his cloak, or the thing that he's wearing, I just rolled out a big piece of brown fondant, and I did this in 3 sections, only because the piece would have had to be really big and I didn't want to have trouble with it. So I just draped on 3 different pieces of fondant, and I'm trying my best to make it look like cloth, so you want to give it folds and wrinkles. You don't want it to look perfect, which is great because it makes things a lot easier when it doesn't have to look perfect. But just try your best to give it some drapes. Now I'm adding the upper part of his cloak, his coat. I'm not real sure what he wears. But for this I just rolled out a thick piece of light brown fondant and I just wrapped it around like a little scarf. And I went in with my non-slip grip mat. This is the mat that came with my cookie turntable. And I'm just using this to add a little texture. Now for his eyes, I wasn't recording when I added the red part to his eyeball, but basically you're just going to add on 2 football shapes. And then I added the green part over so that this would act as his eyelids. So for this I'm brushing on a little vodka, and then I'm going in with my fondant tools to blend the seams. So you want to do this with vodka and not water because the vodka will evaporate and it'll look matte, but if you did it with water then it would stay shiny wherever you added the water, and that's not really what you want. I added on the upper eyelids and the bottom eyelids, and I did the same thing, just blended as best as I could. So for the eyeballs, I started off with the red base and then I added the black circle in the middle, but I ended up just making the whole eye black in the end, so you can save yourself some time and just go in with a piece of black fondant instead of red. Now for his ears, I added a skewer through his entire head, and this is going to help hold up the ears. Without the skewer, the ears would just flop down. So I added on these little cone shapes to each side of the ears, and then I went in with my vodka and my smoothing tool, and I blended that as best as I could to hide the seams. So now I'm making 2 balloon shapes. These are going to be his hands, and then I'm going in and cutting his fingers. Basically from here, just shape it until it resembles claws. For his eyes, I ended up going in with a layer of black fondant because I wanted them to pop out a little more. But again, like I said, just start off with black fondant and then you don't have to worry about all of this. So going back to his ears, I ended up adding on a second skewer to give it a little more length. And then I just added on a thin piece of fondant. I made a quick little template to give me like a basic shape for his ear. And then from here, you're going to shape things, cut things, trim things, until it just makes sense. And again, going back in and hiding those seams. So for a lot of this, it's a lot easier to just watch rather than have me explain. So you're going to do the exact same thing for the second ear, and I realized after that the second ear was a little bit shorter, but for some reason that second ear just gave me so many problems. I think I retried it about 3 or 4 times until I finally got it. Now for his sleeves, so I've cut this like 4-sided shape. I don't even know what it is, but then I'm just going to stick this right under the little scarf thing that we made. And then again, you just want to kind of drape it. You don't want it to lie too flat because you want it to look like it has dimension, like he has arms in there. So now is the fun part. Now we get to add some color and bring him to life. So I've started off with the red petal dust, and I am adding this to the center of his ears, and then I also added that to his cheeks. And I'm going to go in with the darker green and start dusting around his ear. So we're just going to highlight things, add color. Basically you want to just bring him to life because he's looking a little dull. So around his ears I did a darker green. The center of his ear was red. I added red and green to his cheeks. I added a little red to his lips as well. And I'm adding that darker green to his eyelids and to his eyebrows. So with this darker green, I basically ended up dusting it all over his face because I wanted to give him a little more color. I felt like the green that I originally chose was a little too light. So if you check my Instagram, you'll see how the client actually wanted him to look in the end. And I didn't want to add that to this video just because, you know, kids. So that was the reason that I added the red around his eyes, because of what the client had wanted. So just be mindful of how much dust you have on your brush. You always want to shake it off before you actually add it to the cake, because I got a little carried away and I added a little too much color around his nose and a little underneath his eyes. And I wasn't liking it, so I had to go in with my vodka and remove the color that I had added, and then I went in with different shades to fix it. Having an assortment of different size brushes is really going to be helpful. There's little areas where you want smaller brushes and larger areas where you just want a more fluffy brush. So just try to get a nice assortment of brushes. Also make sure to highlight and add dust on the wrinkles to his head. And then I also wanted to add a little color to his outfit or his cloak. So I went in with black petal dust and I highlighted the indents and the folds, and this just helped give a little more dimension. To finish him off, I didn't show it on camera, but I went in and painted his claws with a black edible paint, and then I also went in and painted his eyeballs black after it was finished dusting. As you can see in the video, his eyes got really dusty and a little gray. So this was the final outcome of Baby Yoda. He definitely was a labor of love. Oh my gosh, he took so many hours to complete. But I was really happy with the outcome. And again, I was learning as I was going. This was my first time doing a cake like this. It was just a matter of experimenting and just hoping things came out fine. So if you want to see why he has that little hole in his mouth and why I added a little red around his eyes, you can check my Instagram. I have the photos there. Also, my Instagram is @bakeup__ if you want to go check out that picture. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.